Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, welcome in to podcast episode 173. We, in this episode, are going to talk about something that we really have not talked about much on the podcast, and that is typography. And my guest in this episode, Oliver Schöndorfer, I hope I got that pretty close. Oliver, you're Austrian. What do you expect from a simple Columbus, Ohio boy? Tried my best with that last name. Hopefully I got it close. But anyway, Oliver is a typography enthusiast. He actually, gosh, what an awesome guy. He's super funny too. He has a brand called pimpmytype.com. I highly recommend after this episode that you visit his website and subscribe to his YouTube channel because he makes typography fun. In this episode, we're going to dish out some tips for you to get better typography chops for all of your website builds. And this is really interesting because you might think, how can a couple of dudes talk about typography for over an hour? Well, this is the Josh Hall Web Design Show. As you know, we can go really deep into something. And I'll be honest, I feel like we just scratched the surface on typography here. So really, really excited to hear what you think about this episode and to hear how Oliver's thoughts and insights and practices for picking out really good typography will help you as well, because typography is not just words on a screen. I mean, they are super important. They are the conversion tool. Images and graphics, as you'll hear in this episode, will definitely help gain interest, but words sell. I don't know who came up with that, but I heard it a while ago and I totally agree, and I found it to be true. So in this episode, you're going to glean so many insights on how to do better web typography. And before we dive in, before Oliver takes over here, I do want to say Oliver is actually doing a training in my coaching community, my web design club, on this. So we tried the best we could in this episode to talk about things that are typically a little more visual. But if you do want to see this in a more visual manner and you would like to actually visualize this and have some more resources, you can join my web design club, my coaching community. You go to joshhall.co/coaching. There will be a special offer there for you if you'd like to join. And you can hear from Oliver and see his presentation. And you'll also get coaching, private coaching with me. And you'll be welcomed into this amazing web design community that's just blossoming right now. I'd love to help you in your web design journey as well. And without further ado, here is Oliver Schöndorfer, and we are going to talk about tips for pimping out your web typography. Oliver, welcome onto the podcast, man. What a pleasure to have you on.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be your guest, Josh. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really super pumped about this topic because I don't think we've talked really about typography at all on the podcast so far. And we were just chatting. I know, right? I mean, I know. I just hurt your feelings, which you are a funny dude, man. I love your YouTube channel. I'm going to bring that up throughout this talk. I definitely recommend everyone checking you out. Because look, when it comes to design and creativity, some of this can be a little boring if type isn't your favorite thing, but I know we're going to make this fun. And I think that's what I like about your style and why I wanted to bring you on is you have such a fun, energetic charisma style, and typography is important. And like I said, we really haven't talked about it too much. I think mainly because it's more visual. But by golly, I know we'll do our best to talk about this in an audio format, and obviously you have a ton of resources. So before we dive into it, man, do you want to let everybody know, first off, where you're based out of? And when people ask you what you do, what do you tell them?
Yeah, I'm from Austria, south of Germany, middle of Europe. And I actually describe myself as a user interface designer and typographer. And yeah, people don't know what I do when I say that. So that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sure
people, let's say.
Yeah, I was going to say you're talking to, your grandma or your aunt or something. Maybe you say, what do you tell them? Do you just say I do graphic design or something?
Yes, graphic design mostly covers it, and it's also my background from an educational point of view. So I went to design school, but before that, I was a, let's say, web designer, the webmaster back in 2002 or something when I started, or 2000, year 2000, I started doing stuff on the internet. So, it's more than 20 years now. Cool, but. That's what where I originated with my design career, so to say. And
yeah, give us a little more backstory on your design career then. So did you start with like print, or did you start with web back then? Because the cool thing about typography is that it is important for both, of course, any type of graphic design and print. And that was my background. I did print design, t-shirt design, and then I did web, and typography was right there through all of it. So what did that look like for you? Did you start out with just print and then work your way into web, or what did that look like?
Yeah, in my case, it was, I learned about HTML, not CSS, because that wasn't such a thing back then in 2000, at least not in Austria. And I did my own first Star Trek fan page. It's always a fan page, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's how a lot of journeys start, isn't it? Like a fan page, or I got started when MySpace was really popular, so it was always MySpace pages.
Yeah. So I did it myself, and it was super exciting just to create stuff, put this out on the internet. And it was just amazing to see how people basically could visit it, but nobody visited this, of course. Yeah, because it was my Star Trek homepage. and these were the beginnings of it. So I kind of figured out, about designing stuff. This sounds interesting. But then I didn't want to go to, let's say, to a technical high school where you could learn graphic design when you're 14 years old in Austria, because I had a wrong image of this job. I just thought graphic design is drawing. And
okay. Yeah.
And I wasn't bad drawing, but I wasn't. Just bored me to draw apples and oranges. And then I said, no, I don't want to do this for 4 years and then continue with it my lifetime. I just I imagined this profession totally wrong. But after some time, I figured out it would be the best to, just do stuff for the web. And then I said, why not continue with doing design stuff? And so I went to design school, and they were mostly focused on print, but I came with this web background from my own enthusiasm and interest. And I kind of, mixed this all together then in my design school years.
Well, I think that's really powerful when you can mix web and the print side of typography, because a lot of the principles are the same, but of course on web, there's responsive design. So suddenly a header on desktop is going to need to be usually shifted or tweaked for mobile. And then when it comes to other heading and typography and body fonts, it's all going to be a little bit different than just a static image like you would find with print and graphic design. Now, before we went live, you were talking a little bit about how a lot of people tend to overlook typography. And this was actually my case. I didn't take typography too seriously until later on, and I wish I would have. I always tended to design elements and really go wild on graphics and color schemes, and then I would just kind of plop a paragraph of text in there. So can you tell us, like, why is typography something that we really should view as something really important?
Yeah, maybe a bit about my background here as well, because it was the same for me. When I did websites and stuff before I went to design school, you just, there are some typefaces, you can choose them in Photoshop or Word or whatever. And then it looks differently. Okay, nice. But the thing is, I didn't understand why I should use what typeface. I just picked them because I liked them or they were interesting or whatever. I didn't pay much attention to it. And then I had the great opportunity to learn about this from my typography teacher from Italy, a Venetian called Giovanni De Faccio. It's just his name alone. It's just like music, isn't it? And
it sounded fun to say. I'm definitely not going to try to say it.
Let's say my last name. So have fun with that. But
yeah, we'll see how the intro goes for this one. I may just call you Oliver S. So we'll see how it goes.
Yes. I challenge everybody from States with that, or English, but that's okay. So, and he just told us about why typography is important and showed it to us. And back then, I learned so much basic principles that I was shocked how many mistakes I made in my earlier designs and how easily they could be fixed. And I also was shocked why so many professional products or printed layouts and stuff do not pay that much attention to typography, because I learned this after one semester of design school, some weeks, and I had a basic understanding of this. But why don't the professionals know about it? And this shocked me. And there was one moment when I learned that you should space out all caps letters, and because it makes a more even word image to change the gaps between the letters, because all caps letters are made to be combined with lowercase letters. And this is why in some situations it will look weird. So tracking in CSS terms, adding some letter spacing for all caps letters is very helpful to make it more even and harmonious. And after knowing that, I stepped into the shower and I grabbed the shampoo bottle, and there it struck me, because the letters were not spaced out properly, and I was just shocked. How could they not do this? How couldn't they see it? And after that, I decided, basically I should talk about this. And then I started with talks and so on, and started to educate people how they can boost their visual languages. Or their visual products.
Yeah. You said a term in there that's really interesting, and that is a word image. And you just gave a great practical example of, learning something and seeing it on a bottle. I used to do this all the time when, like, my wife and I would go to the mall or something. I would just look at posters, because if she'd be like shopping for something, I'd be bored and I'd just be looking around. And then eventually I started utilizing that time to look at good design and learn from different typography. And I actually really enjoyed that. I still do that today. I really enjoy that. But there is often like a breakthrough moment when you look at type differently, when you think about it like a word image. And I'm trying to remember, I had a buddy who worked at a graphic design shop for a little while, and I just saw their portfolio, and it was all words. It was all letters, but it looked amazing. And it was just the way they combined the different caps and lowercase and body fonts and structure of the letters. It all made this incredible image. It was all letters. It was all typography. So it is interesting. It's fair to say that, it is I guess typography and letters, it does and can make an image, can it? Like it really makes a big impact on how we view something.
Yeah. There's a typographer from the States, Jason Pimentel, who said typography is like I actually forgot his quote right now. But whatever. The thing is, typography is more or less the clothes your words wear. Maybe he said this, maybe he didn't.
We'll find it.
We'll find it, definitely. But the thing is, you always see something first before you read it. And it always evokes a feeling or an atmosphere or something. You cannot not pick a proper or not proper font. It will work or it won't. And this is the magic power behind typography, because I don't know any website or any app or any thing in visual communication or graphic design that can work without text, except some signage, pictograms and this stuff. But text is such an important part of everything, and people pay a lot of attention to the images. They pay a lot of attention to colors, to layout. But then typography, let's use let's use Helvetica or Open Sans. It's good, why not? Everybody does,
Yeah, and that's where I was. It was an afterthought. And I heard a quote a while back that I've talked about on the podcast before. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Oliver. And the quote is, "Images engage, but words sell." How do you feel about that? Because I totally feel that that's correct. And this is really important, because you can get a lot of traffic and get some engagement, but when it comes to like selling a product or a service, it's the typography that people are going to move forward with. Do you back that statement up, as in images engage, words sell?
Yeah, I totally get this, because images, they draw your attention, but then the content itself, like seduces you, or the image seduces you, and then the words themselves, they might trigger that rational point. I guess I would agree with that, but as we said, the type itself is an image. I have two basic principles I always talk about. And one is font follows feeling, and the other one is font follows function. And before that, I said font follows feeling is, you have to make me care. Why should I want to read it? It should look appealing, interesting. It should pull me in. Why should I want to read that? And this is so important, because the feeling is before the functionality. Because if I don't care, if I don't feel for it, I don't care if I can't read it, if it's not functional, if it's not working, if it's not set properly. So these are basically these two layers where you have to connect with something. And I think in typography, everything is combined, because content itself, the words themselves, and the shape are one. You cannot put them apart. You cannot not read it. And you cannot say, oh, this looks, or you cannot, let's say, move away from the idea that this, or think it's neutral. Type is never neutral. That's the quote from Jason Fundamental. Yes.
I knew we'd get there. Either if we looked it up or it'd come to you. I knew it.
Yeah. So type is never neutral. You always make a decision. You always set things up.
That's a good point. I imagine it either pulls you in or pushes you away, depending on how it's laid out. I love that. I love that idea. So font follows feeling and then follows function, or maybe I didn't say that exactly correct. Let's dive into feeling. How do we choose fonts that fit with the right feeling, whether it's our site as a web designer or whether it's our client sites? And, there's brand styles and guidelines. Like, how do we find fonts that echo the brand? Do we have to think about the customer and who's going to be looking at the site to decide what type of fonts we choose? What are some of your tips for getting the right font for the right feeling?
Yeah, the thing with font follows feeling, we have these broad categories of typefaces that everybody or most people are familiar with. And the thing with categories is you want to categorize things to make a decision. No system is perfect, but these basic categories most people know, and most foundries or websites like Google Fonts, Adobe Fonts, My Fonts, whatever, they use these categorizations that you can make up your mind about what typeface should work. And there are 6 broad categories like sans serif. Most of them know this. It's the fonts without the serifs, sans the sans serif. Then there's serif, sans the sans, so just serif. And then you have slab serif, script, handwritten, and display fonts. So these are different categories. And if we go through them one by one and imagine how they might look, sans serif typeface, very popular one might be Helvetica or Arial, which is more or less the same, but okay. So Helvetica or Arial or Open Sans, these are all sans serif fonts. Roboto, these are considered to be more modern. Most people might say these fonts are, they are modern, they look neutral, open, whatever. The details always make this up. So you always want to consider the details and structure of the typeface. It's not just about if it has serif or not, but they are considered to be the typefaces of the future. And the reason for that is because in history, this was it's the point where we are now. Because serif fonts came before that. This was the more or less traditional thing we saw. You can imagine it's like Times New Roman, Georgia. These are serif typefaces with this tiny little feet or strokes at the end of the letters. And Yeah.
When I got into typography and design, I started getting into it in like 2010-ish. And it seemed to be, I think I got into design in an interesting time because it was almost the end of the most popular fonts being the serif fonts, like Times New Roman and Georgia, like you just said, Oliver, the ones that have feet or kind of have like the maybe not pointy edges, but some sort of ending on all of the ends of the letters. And then it was like, boom, Helvetica, Arial, where letters ended straight or like very flat. The curves were minimal. Is that fair to say as far as some of the differences and how quote unquote modern the sans serif look?
Yeah, this was more or less the trend we entered in the 2010s or late 2000s, where, for example, Google, Facebook, Spotify, Airbnb, everybody remade their logo, their brand, made a soulless geometric sans serif out of it. And everything looked the same. It was just, everything flat, clean, replaceable. And this is the problem I have with sans serif. Let's say the positive parts of it. It can be very minimalistic, clean, so on. This can evoke this feeling, but on the other hand, it could be very restrained, technical, dry, and also replaceable because you see it everywhere. If you use something in Helvetica or Open Sans, forget about being unique or interesting or something. It's just looking like everybody else.
And is that because it's just commonplace and just typical now for a lot of folks to use that, or do a lot of sans serif fonts tend to look like each other?
No, I think it's more because these typefaces are super popular.
Okay.
And it came more or less with a trend. This is my opinion. It came more or less with the trend from Google, Roboto, and Material Design, and now San Francisco, the typeface from Apple. These are all more or less this grotesque, neo-grotesque, Helvetica-like fonts optimized for screen, though. And there also was a time when Helvetica was on macOS, which was a dark time, because Helvetica is a font from the 50s and not from the 2050s, from the 1950s.
Interesting.
And it was not optimized for screen. And if you did not have a retina display, it was not very legible at smaller sizes. It was just a horrible design decision. Horrible. But things got better after that.
Oh, come on, Oliver. Tell me how you really feel about. We got to feel how you really tell me how you feel about that.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
No, I sense the passion, man. I sense it.
Yeah. No, the thing is, when you pay attention to something like typography, you're cursed. You're just cursed because you see bad type everywhere. I had to switch my bank.
That is it. You have to switch your bank. That's a good point real quick before you move on to that. You do. When you look at type and you start to understand it, and it just, you can do that with websites too. Once you become a web designer, you look at every website and you're picking it apart. Same thing with type. It's like, oh man, when I see bad type now, I can't get over it. I tell my wife, I'm like, babe, look at this. This is terrible. What? I'm sure you do that hundreds of times a day. It sounds like.
Yeah. It's like these PTSD moments.
Right.
You just start shaking and lie on the ground it's horrible. So the thing with bad typography is it's everywhere. And after some time, you kind of become immune or not immune. You don't care that much, but I still care because it's like wasted potential. This is what really breaks my heart. It's wasted potential. You have such a great brand, such a great idea, or such a great message. Why don't you just give it the shape it deserves to live its full potential? And in many cases, people just don't know better. And when I come back to Open Sans is a good typeface. Really, honestly, it's a good typeface. Also, Lato,
that's
Roboto,
good because that's what I have on my website. Open Sans.
I know. I checked this
I
out.
figured you wouldn't have reached out if I had terrible typography unless you wanted to learn me some.
No, sure. After this podcast, you will change it to something else, I guess. So, but
well, I was kind of curious because I am from the school again of sans serif, the typical fonts like Arial, Open Sans, all the ones you've mentioned so far.
Yeah,
I'm not against by any means serif fonts. Although I think I tend to gravitate towards sans serif fonts, and that might just be because of my background. And I just tend to, maybe that's just what I was used to. But it is interesting. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, most books are all still printed as serif fonts, right? Aren't they mostly all Times New Roman or? or Georgia,
yeah,
like
whatever.
traditional
Garamond
printed.
is very popular from the century Gothic is century. Yeah, that's correct. And this is also the reason sans serif or serif. The thing is, you have to make up your mind for who this project or product is. Always consider this. And in your case, it's about web design, and web design might be considered to be more technical, modern. So I think sans serif fits there. But there are a lot of different kinds of sans serifs. So if you imagine Futura, for example, or Futura in German, which is an old typeface, basically. It's almost 100 years old. It's from 1920s. So it's really old. And but it still looks very modern because it's very geometric. It has some big disadvantages when it comes to long reading text, because it's the letter shapes are so similar that it's harder to make word shapes more distinct. But it's a nice typeface. It's a great typeface if you want to make this, look modern or something like this.
Well, it's kind of ironic because it sounds like it would, Futura would be a future font, but it's actually sounds like it's one of the oldest that might still be hanging around. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, but there are some updated versions as well. And Monotype, who are not the, Monotype is like monopoly type because they own everything now, everything. Yeah. But Monotype made a new version of Futura. And this one is very cool. I think it's called Futura now, and also updated it very, very carefully. But coming back to this idea of serifs and sans serifs, the serif typefaces might be considered more traditional because they are rooted deeper in history, and we are familiar with them from print more. And the reason for them being used in books more is because there are great typefaces on screens, on computer screens that are very legible as serif fonts, like Georgia, which was designed for low resolution back in 1993 by Matthew Carter, the one and only. And this is a great typeface for screen. And in nowadays high resolution or high density screens, it doesn't really matter anymore on a phone because we have such dense displays. We can use a serif typeface the same as we could a sans serif typeface. This also might be some baggage from the past where they said use a simpler typeface on screen or in web design, just to provide a good experience for the user.
So going back to the initial thought of getting the right feeling, it sounds like the common sense approach to this with, who is this for? Or who are the clients? How much reading are they going to do on the site? How much content as far as actual words are going to be on this? Is it going to be a long form style blog post type of site? I imagine those will all factor into getting the right feeling, right? When you look at these font selections. Yeah. And what about mixing the two? How do you feel about, and this is what I do often, and I'm seeing a lot of brands do this, where they may have a serif header and then a sans serif body font, or vice versa, a sans serif header and then a serif body font. How do you feel about that? Do you have any tips or recommendations or feelings towards mixing the two?
Yeah, of course. The thing is, mixing typefaces is always very interesting. It's like with mixing clothes or mixing colors. If you want to emphasize something or change something, you have a different kind of vibe for every kind of text, because there are basically three kinds of text. There's body text, like you said, this long reading format text. If you really have a blog post or a news website where you have a lot of text, where you want people to consume a lot of text, this is body text. And then you have your display text, which doesn't come from computer display, it comes from display sizes, which means it should be larger than 24 or and above pixels, or 2024. It's not that exact, but things like headings, titles, things that can be larger there. And then you have functional text, which is very important for user interface and web design, for navigational elements, for captions, for things that are very small. Think about the tab bar in iOS, or labels, buttons, these kind of stuff that usually have to be very small. They have very little space. And these three kinds of texts demand different typefaces that can provide a good experience for this. And in the case where you mix it for a heading, actually, I think your fonts are not loaded because it says you have Gotham in your heading, but it shows up like Helvetica. And and below
I'll double check that. It's actually through I have Gotham for my heading fonts. But I've got that coded in there. So I might double check that if that's not pulling up for you. But I can't remember, but Helvetica as the back. Well, I'm so sorry, Oliver. You're probably upset with me now. I'll change that though. I'll make that open sans. How's that sound?
Just put it in my heart and kill me more. No. No, don't make it open. The thing is, you should, when you mix these different kinds of text, you can always pick back to these categories. A display typeface, this is in Google Fonts, and if you have this option, display typeface. Display typeface mostly is anything that doesn't fit in the other categories. Let's throw it in there. And gotcha. Display typefaces are made to be set at larger sizes. They can look more interesting. They can be very themey, like a very, let's say, Western style John Wayne saloon signage.
Sure.
Font, or something very goofy, something handwritten that looks handwritten or scripty or something. This could be a category on its own, but it's all only usable for display purposes, for larger sizes, for short text. And
would that be good for I'm sorry, real quick. Would that be good for like quotes or like an accent type of tagline? Just stuff that's more sprinkled in there.
Yeah, sure. And this also, it's like a bit salt in the soup, as a German saying is, but a pinch of salt in your design maybe, and to make things look interesting and to keep the reader engaged. So when you have a display typeface, you can go a bit wild if you want. So you can pick something that fits the theme you want, only if it's short and large. This is the condition. Display typeface, short and large. If you use something very striking for body text, that's a bad idea. Body text should always be more or less calm, clean, boring, just boring. Nobody should care about the type. I care, you care, everybody now cares, I'm sure. But nobody should care about the body text. It should just be easy and inviting to read. But for the headings and for the pull quotes and this stuff, you can make something interesting that draws people in and that's more interesting, sure.
That's a great overview. I love that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And for the functional text and this stuff, you have to find something that's, sans serif is mostly used in user interfaces. User interfaces are mostly functional text because they have smaller sizes, are 12 pixels, which is tiny. So when you consider 16 to 20 pixels size for body text, compared to this for your captions or for your snack bar or another material design word, whatever. If you have this components, UI components, you have little space and you want your text to be readable at small sizes. Also, you want it to be clear. Maybe you have names there, you have tokens in there. So specific tokens like a password, maybe. You really want to be sure that this is a capital I and not a lowercase l.
Ah, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Or this is an O and not a 0. So these are some situations where it's critical to be distinct. A monospace typeface there would be really smart. In my password manager, I'd use a monospace for these situations. But there are also some names or tokens and stuff where you really have to make things clear and stand out. And this then, I always do a test and I call this the IL1 test. You use, as I said, a capital I, a lowercase l, and the figure 1. And if all these letters look different, it's a good choice. In serif fonts, they will, because the capital I will have a serif on top and on the bottom. And the lowercase l will only have a serif or a large serif on the bottom. And the 1 will also look different. But if you take a look at Gill Sans, which you might be familiar with, I, L, these three shapes are all the same. They're all long rectangles. And it's just horrible because this is not very distinct. Yeah.
I never thought about typography and the importance of that was passwords. Cause some letters and numbers do conflict with each other. Now, overall, are serif fonts better for passwords just because of the legibility rather than sans serif, or do both tend to work?
They might work, but serif fonts, I'd go for a monospaced font because they are mostly made for being super legible and clear. Every character uses up the same space. So It's also easier to read in these situations. So I'd go for a monospaced font. But also we have a category that's called the slab serif fonts. And slab serifs are like these like Rockwell, Clarendon kind of fonts where they have some exaggerated serifs. In history, they came before the sans serifs because this is very interesting because we had these serif typefaces. Then printing became a thing, and we got some big printing machines with offset printing, and it was easier to create advertising. And people wanted text to be big, and so they made them interesting. All these display typefaces came in the 1800s, and then they blew up everything. And to make things interesting, they made exaggerated the serifs and made the strokes sturdier and everything. And then they said, why not just leave the serifs off? Okay. Suddenly there were sans serifs. So
interesting. That was the birth
evolution there. Yeah.
It is kind of funny. It's like there's two teams. It's like there's the serif team and the sans serif, and sometimes they play nicely together, and sometimes they're at war with each other. Now, now that we're getting tactical, which I think we've really laid a good foundation of why this is important, of how we perceive typography, and we talked a little bit about the feeling versus the functionality. I'd like to dive into functionality now, particularly for web design. I think I never really thought about it like this, Oliver, but you really laid out a great set of categories for typography and websites, because we do, I guess in my mind, we have four main ones. If I were to teach this, I would say we have four main ones, being that we have headers, we have the body text, we have, I guess you mentioned like display text, which would be menu items, buttons, call to actions maybe. And then we would have, I guess I would call them like, I don't know, ancillary or featured type of text for quotes and things like that. I think those are probably the four main areas of text that I use. So let's hone in on those. Let's talk about body font real quick, because this is a biggie. A lot of people, I see a lot of designers who are early on who tend to use one font, and then it's the same for the header and it's the same for the body font. But the problem with that sometimes is if they don't adjust the boldness or the letter spacing or the line height is a big one. It all just kind of, it's like, I don't know. It's like you just had like a big blob of paint and you just kind of just put it right there on the page, and you can't really make it out too much. So what are some tips for body fonts in particular? Do you recommend having a little more line height and spacing in between lines? And then also, the spacing between the letters and the kerning? What are some tips on that?
Yeah, sure. This is basically now typography, because typography is setting text with prefabricated letters. And in our case, they're prefabricated by the computer, but we don't write the stuff ourselves. And after picking a proper typeface for these kinds of texts, we have to set it well. And as you said, when you have a headline and you set it larger, it most likely, there are typefaces that are made for that. And they often have this word display after it, or large or something like this, because they tend to have more details in there. They tend to be a bit narrower, and the spacing after the characters is a bit smaller. So it doesn't fall apart that much, because body text fonts mostly need a bit more space, or if it's made for body text, it doesn't need any space at all, letter spacing. It should create a harmonious line, or even typographic color, not color, but appearance of grays. Yeah. And when it comes to line height, there's this holy trinity of typography, as I say.
All right, hit me with it. Hit us. Hit us with the typography. Here. Yeah, hit me with the typopography holy trinity. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. Jesus came up with it. No, just joking.
It came from the original scrolls. That's how this typography came. So let's hear it.
Yeah, sure. It came from there. It's the line length, the line height, and the font size, and these all work together. If you adjust one, you have to adjust the other. So starting with your body text, set your text large enough. And what means large enough? You should start with the browser defaults, 1M. And 1M is mostly calculated to 16 pixels. But then when it comes to screens and larger desktop screens, you could bump up the font size the larger the screen is, because you can assume that a person is sitting further away from a screen that has 27 inch. It's not that close to your body compared to a phone. A phone you hold pretty close to your body, maybe 1.5 feet or something. Not sure if this is correct because I have the metric system. I'm just improvising.
Oh yeah, no, I think you're about right. Yeah, probably about 1.5 feet. Yeah. That sounds about right on our side. That's across the pond. That sounds about right.
50 centimeters.
There it is. Gotcha.
Half a meter, whatever. So you if you hold things closer to your body, you can make them slightly smaller. If they're further away, you should make them larger. This also means that you could just add a media query and bump up the font size after a certain breakpoint or certain screen width. We assume, or you can make this fluid. There are some techniques about this, how to do this in CSS and with viewport units and clamp and stuff. Look this up. But the thing is, you should consider increasing the font size the larger the screen is, because we can assume the viewer is further away from it, and maybe slightly 10% decrease it on a phone or something. But never ever go below 14 pixels. No, never. No, don't do that.
Great rule of thumb.
Small text, if it's just some if it's a little text, okay, but if it's body text, really heavy reading text, set it in a size that's appropriate. And when it comes now to the line length, there's this idea of an ideal line. So the ideal length of a line. People say it's 60 to 80 characters. Recently, I read a study about this, or a meta-study about this, that this is not backed by science in any way. It's more or less the convention. We have a column in the book is mostly 60 to 80 characters wide, and then we switch to the next line,
Which would equate to what? Like, isn't that between like 10 or 15 words or so? Is that right? On average?
Yeah, maybe. It depends on the language. In German, we have so long words that's one word.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I guess
in English, English, I'm not sure about the words. Yeah.
So what was interesting, this is really interesting, Oliver, because in so I have a design course that touches on typography. I mean, you're taking what you do is photography. So I would say if anyone wants to go further with this, go to your YouTube channel and stuff, because I just cover the basics, but that is a biggie. And one problem that I used to do with a lot of my sites early on, when I didn't really care about typography, is I would just put a huge paragraph from end to end on a screen. And there would be in English, probably 30 words across. And I didn't, I know, right? I just hurt you again. Yeah, and I probably did them in Helvetica. So podcast. You just like double heart attack. So we're done. All right. See you later. So, it was literally like, and then if it wasn't responsive, a bigger screen, it might stretch out even further, which is the importance of a max width on a module or an area. And then in English, having that break from maybe 10 and 12 words or so, and then it breaks down to the next line, because that is so much more readable than these long, wide paragraphs. And I didn't really think about how terribly hard that is to read until I actually read it myself. Because when you're used to, and I guess if I could give a rule of thumb to everyone listening right now, when it comes to a lot of text on your website, is think about you reading a book. If you've got 3 paragraphs for a blog post or something, or for a page, think about it like a book. how many words are you going to read before you're used to going down to the next line, and put it like that on your website. It really does have to lend itself to the similar reading pattern, because it can be pretty detrimental to call to action, to engagement. I mean, this is the importance of typography that we're into now.
Sure. Yeah. About the 60 to 80 characters, this is just like everything in typography. These are guidelines. There are no strict rules there. Right. It's a visual discipline. And but they are the most rules or guidelines in any visual field when it comes to graphic design. But nevertheless, these 60 to 80 characters, maybe we are familiar with them. They are not backed by science or something, but even if we're familiar with them, why not? Yeah. So you can add this max width, and you should, and you did, as you described. This is it's intimidating to have a very long line on a wide screen. It's intimidating. You don't want to read this. Just visit Wikipedia. It doesn't have a max width. It's just horrible. If you check out the typography article on Wikipedia on your large 20K 200-inch display, whatever, you have an endless line. You only have one line.
I'm doing it right now, and I'm regretting this decision. It's like pain. Yeah, it just doesn't.
I don't get it. Why they didn't put a max width on this layout? But
my gosh. So there's everyone's test to do right now. If you're by a computer, and you can check this out, go to Wikipedia and just drag your browser, and the text will never stop. It will never stop. Go.
Yeah, it's like this fluid layout from the early 2000s. Cool.
Yeah. So that's a couple great principles for body fonts there. Interesting that you said a lot of the fonts that were made for body fonts, whether they're sans serif or serif, tend to look good kind of as is out of the box. And of course, you can adjust line height. And let's touch on line height real quick, because I remember, like I mentioned, I started with graphic design, and it was a band. I was in a band. I was a drummer for a rock band, and I first started designing our t-shirts and our CD artwork. And I made the CD artwork look pretty good, but when it came to the words, that was the problem. It was nearly unreadable because the fonts were so small, and the kerning wasn't great, and the spacing in between the lines of the letters, that was a problem. And I realized that a little bit of space, line height, is actually really good to help it be more readable. Any tips on that in particular, if you have a lot of text that is in the body?
Yeah, sure. First, you have to set your max width. This is the first step. Or the font size. We set the font size to 1M, or starting there, maybe a larger, but 1M. And then we continue with the max width. Let's say it's 60 characters or 65 characters. There is a CSS unit that's a character unit. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
You can say max width 64CH or something.
Okay. Oh,
and
I like that.
This will count the width or it will take the width of the 0 in account and use this as a base and then use it. But you could also roughly say that half an M is one character most of the time.
That makes sense.
So 34 M's or something is your max width. And then the larger your lines, the larger your line height should be, which means the browser default is, I guess, 1.3 or something from the user agent. And this is most likely too little for your column of text if it's full width. So
I feel like that's pretty standard, the 1.2 or 1.3 M's. That seems to be standard out of the box for most themes.
It's a relative unit based on the relative size of the typeface. It's not a fixed unit. If you could set it in relative units, and this 1.2 is most likely, or 1.3 is most likely too small for a larger line, because you will start to read the same line over and over again if it's more than 3 lines. Because if it's 3 lines, you don't lose your orientation. But if it's 10 lines in one paragraph, then you will start to read the same line over and over again, because the way your eye has to travel from the end of one sentence or from one line to the beginning of the other is long, so you need more direction. You need a bit more space between that. And so I would recommend something like 1.5, 1.6 even, always depending on the typeface, how it looks, and you have to try this out for your max width. The smaller your column gets, the smaller your line height can become. This means you could go from 1.6 or 1.7 or whatever it is for your full width column to 1.3. Again, maybe, or 1.4, because the way from the end of one line isn't that long anymore. You have a narrow column.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. That's fascinating. I know this would be ideal to see visually, but I think you're doing a good job of explaining it in audio.
The video. There's a video.
Yeah. Well, that's why you got your YouTube channel. Yeah. I think everyone's going to be checking out your YouTube, because a lot of the stuff you talked about so far, I've seen in a couple of your videos that you actually literally, show in video form. So great tips on body font. Real quick, heading fonts and headers. I've seen so much debate on this as far as how big they should be. And of course, this is all relative. Like you said, there's really no right or wrong. There's preferences, there's best practices, I think, just from studies and conversion. I mean, it should be pretty obvious if your fonts and typography are terrible on your site, you're probably not getting much conversion. So if your conversions are going up because of some of these things you're implementing, I'd say that's a good job done. I'd say it's probably working. With headers, again, relative, but I've learned that I try not to put too many words in a heading, because then it becomes a really hard paragraph to read. Or like something that early on I used to make headings that were basically two sentences mixed together, and then suddenly it was like a big bold caps paragraph. What are your tips for headings to give us some basic principles on headings to make them engaging and also kind of like a text image, like you said?
Yeah, the headings, basically, you can use, as I said before, a display font there, something that fits the theme or the idea of your website. It could also be something handwritten or a script font or something that conveys this personality if it fits the topic and the audience, because you set it at a larger size and it's less text or little text, just little text. And this will work then. The thing is, you should always consider a proper hierarchy of sizes. People should understand, and semantics and SEO force you to do this anyway. This is the great thing about it. And it's something that everybody should do anyway, because it's logical and makes sense and guides people. But if you want people to understand how your website is structured, or your offering, or the things your client provides, or whatever you need this for, you have to have some proper hierarchies. And if I take a look on your site, maybe your audience might be familiar with it on joshhall.co. You make this very clear with your the stats, the goods, the dude, and so on, the results. So basically, you can you see that this is the hierarchies there. Your different headings. You understand it. And when it comes to a marketing site or something like a landing page, what your homepage basically is, it's different than a blog page, because on a blog you might have longer H1 headings because of search engine optimization, of course. And
that's like my podcast pages, like this podcast episode. I'm not sure what number this will be yet, but the heading of this will be a fairly long H1. It'll be a long heading because it's a podcast title episode. Yeah, sure. And this is all makes perfect sense. So, and you should also do this. But the thing there is, there you can decrease the size a bit, and you can emphasize, or hierarchy comes from contrast. If it's contrasting to the rest of the site, and hierarchy shows you importance. And when I take a look again on your website, and I take a look at one podcast episode, maybe my episode then, and this is a great guy, great picture, nice dude, sure. Right. Then I see joshhall.co on the top left, and this is big contrast because it's on dark background, light text. So this is very, very peculiar. I have to look at the heading. So, and it also is a good design trick because it kind of removes itself from the content. So it doesn't
struggle with the hierarchies of the headings.
That's
it's
interesting.
Like its own thing.
That is an interesting take. I have to say, I did not think about it that far when I designed my site, but for those, I mean, I imagine everyone listening has probably seen my website, but as of now, the background of my header is a dark gray, and the text and the menu items and my logo are light. They're white. They kind of pop off that. But I do that intentionally, like you just said, Oliver, so that the content is in a white space, and the content of whether it's a podcast or a page or a layout or a tutorial, that way I have a little more room to add things into the white space there. But again, and I always, when I design websites, I always design them to have a different color header than the body section, typically just to contrast them, to make it very clear. This is a different, it's a different section.
Yeah. So, and this totally works. And then when I look at the heading of a podcast episode, for example, I see it's large. And what is done well here is you reduce the line height. Kudos to you. Great. I'll stay here. No, this is really also one big tip. In headings, you can reduce the line height. The default of 1.3, let's say, is too much, because it kind of starts to fall apart. Because if you have a larger typeface, you only fit a fewer words in there. And it's just not a unit anymore. It's not combined anymore. And you want to have your headings compact. So this is a reason why you should decrease the line height in your large text.
That's a great point.
Every heading, but large text.
I'm just looking at one of my podcast episodes, and you're totally right. Because it is an H1, a heading 1, it's a larger font, although it's not as big as some other places are on my website, but it is basically on average about 6 words across, 6 to 7 words, and then it goes down to the next line. So you just said it, Oliver. If the line or the line or the spacing between each line, the line height was too much, it would look odd. It would be very hard to read. So that's good to know. I think I actually did adjust that intentionally. Well, somewhat intentionally. It looked odd to me, but I didn't know why it looked odd.
And then when you would change, when you go to mobile, you always have to consider that you should make it a bit smaller. You can make it bigger if you have more room, of course, but on mobile, there are also typefaces that have a narrow weight or a narrow style, where you can get more words into one line, and there are variable fonts. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, where you can fluidly adjust if this font provides it's the width of the typeface. And this is just so great for responsive web design. If you have a heading and you want to have it bigger, but you also have to fit more text into this very narrow 370 pixel wide column. And if you don't have something like this, you will have to decrease your font size for your headings slightly, but then use the bold or ultra bold or whatever, the bolder weight to keep this contrast for your headings.
And that's the other thing I wanted to focus on. It's a great point, by the way. And I know you're talking about some CSS terms. The good news is most themes, you can out of the box set this stuff. Like you can set these parameters. So I use the Divi theme by Elegant Themes. And in that, in the customizer, before you even start building your site, you can set it to where headings are this size on desktop, this size on mobile. Cool. Out of the box, which is great. So that can take a lot of the struggle out of this. I am curious about that. So we talked a lot about sizing and font size, but what about bold? Because that's another big way to help out with hierarchy, which we're really talking about hierarchy and separating the big important thoughts, the condensed, headings and stuff like that versus body font stuff that you're going to read. So what are your thoughts on how bold to go? Because over the years, I tend to like bolder and bolder fonts. I used to not like them, but for some reason I like them now. Only as headers, only as here's the big thought. And then boom, then the body content is like you said, calm, chill, readable, not very sexy, not very exciting. It's just boring.
Yeah, your taste also evolves, and this is like with everything. I don't know. I love gin, and I love to drink gin, but your taste evolves over the years. You don't like the things you liked back then because your taste changed. So bold fonts are, as you said, always a good decision if they are set in a larger size. And when it comes to body text and making things bold, in smaller sizes, they can look a bit blurry because they are too dark there. They are designated for larger sizes, and this is also the two problems I mostly see is when people set something too bold in smaller sizes that it becomes hard to read.
Yes.
Or the other problem is when people, let's say, have some body text set in regular font weight 400, and then set the strong or the emphasis or something bold in 500, in medium, or in 600. It always depends on the typeface, of course, but the default is 700, font weight 700, and you should always make it really different. When people say, okay, this is now regular, but the other one is medium. And don't you see the difference? I'm a design student. I see this difference. Great for you, guy. Great for you, girl.
Right.
The thing is, nobody else will see it. If you want to emphasize something, then it should stand out, and then it should have enough contrast. And you can get contrast through different methods. But in this case, make it really stand out, make it really bold. And there I would suggest going from, let's say, font weight 400 to at least font weight 600, 700, or from regular to bold and not semi-bold or medium or something. Yeah.
That's great. Now I have a quick question before we get ready to wrap this up. And I might want to hit you with just some quick questions here to get your initial thoughts as we get ready. Yeah. So, but I am curious real quick. So we talked about body font, or, body section typography. We talked about headers. We already talked about, I guess the other text you might sprinkle in there for accents and quotes and stuff like that. Menu text. How big do you, what are your thoughts on menu text? Should that be as, obviously, depending on the size of your menu, you're not going to be able to make that as big as headers. But my rule of thumb was always to have that kind of be an in-between. It's always a little bit bigger than body text, but not as big as headers. What are your thoughts on menu text and how big that should be? Because it's kind of tough sometimes. I mean, that's a hierarchy thing, but we don't want it to compete with other areas of our site.
Sure. The menu mostly is always on top of a site. If it's on mobile and it's hidden in a burger menu, which is horrible, but then it's not on top anymore. It's just out of sight, out of thought. And in these cases, you can make it smaller because it's on a prominent position anyway, and it will stand out there. You should make it smaller because in German, it's just such a horrible, beautiful language. No, we have long words and it's hard.
Right. So you can have like two menu items, right?
We have two menu items, my surname and another menu item, and we're good. No. You really have to make this a bit smaller. In your case, English is working, most of the time it's working great. In your case, again, looking at your site, you used all caps for your
I did, yeah. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
You could space it out slightly. You could add letter spacing, let's say 0.02 amps or something like it to make it a bit looser there. But it mostly will work. It's okay because your words are pretty short and the weight is also not that thin, so it can be a bit more compact. It's okay. And it also fits your logo type, so I guess this is also fine. You could align the arrow back then a bit and put it.
That's actually, by the way, that's where it might. I guess it could go up one, right? Maybe a couple pixels. I see that. I know. Again, we're talking about this while looking at it, so it's for some folks just on podcasts. You go to my site at joshhall.co and maybe follow along here. But the reason I actually made my font for my menu and headers Gotham, which I'll tweak that just to make sure it's coming through on your end, is because my logo is the Gotham sans serif font. But I was kind of curious, which, I mean, gosh, I designed this in 2017, although luckily I feel like most of these principles have still held up. I don't have any plans on completely blowing up my site anytime soon, but so all caps, what would be your rule for all caps versus lowercase? Do you have any parameters on that? Because I tend to do all caps only if it's short words.
Sure, and that's the reason for it, because letters get or words get very long set in all caps. They need a lot of space, also depending on the typeface, but mixed case always needs less space than all cap space. And for a sentence or something, it's harder to read because the letter shapes again are not distinct enough. You don't have ascenders and descenders. You just have more or less a long rectangle. It's all legible. No worries about that. But it's not that ideal if you want to read longer text. For a menu item, it will work. If it's in English, it might work. It's okay. If it was in German, I wouldn't use it because it would use up too much space there.
That makes total sense.
So I'd go for mixed case then. And about the size again, you should make it smaller. Let's say 14 pixels or something like this.
For the menu items?
Yeah, for the menu. And this is also a tip. If you reduce the size for your functional text or something like this, again, on a podcast site, you use then your by Josh Hall, the date, the podcast, the comments, the category links, and all this stuff that's below the H1. Mm-hmm. This is functional text, which means like something like a caption or something like this. It falls into the same category of your navigation, more or less. So you could, because it's small, you could use a stronger weight there to not make it disappear that much, because it gets too delicate. Yeah, and you always increase the tracking when you set it smaller. So
that's interesting.
These are the tips for these navigational elements. You mostly will need a medium weight. I'm currently working on a font checklist for user interface design.
Oh, awesome!
Where I also cover this, where I basically cover the things you should pay attention to when it comes to choosing a font for an app or user interface design. And this is one of the tips. You use a medium weight for smaller sizes, so it won't be this delicate and airy and invisible almost.
Good tips, man. And my rule of thumb and what I've done with my site is my menu are all caps, my main navigation, and then generally all of my buttons and my call to actions are caps, just because it's purchase or buy here or find out more or something like that. So again, that's just kind of what I've found to work, but I am trying to get better at streamlining everything. That way you don't have a mix of all caps, some caps, so that's kind of been interesting, but I like this. It was kind of an unintentional little, kind of, peek at my website with some of your thoughts from the typography. So I might want to do this on a deeper level. I might schedule a one-on-one with you so we can really go through that. So let me hit you just to wrap this up here, Oliver. This has been a really interesting hour. I love nerding out on some of this stuff. I'm sure some of the people who love typography have enjoyed hearing your insight on this. Just a couple quick, rapid fire questions before we end. How many fonts should you stick to on a website? How many different font styles?
How many different font styles or typefaces? Now we come into this category of fonts or typefaces. Oh God, no.
I guess it would be typefaces. Right? Because you might have bold,
like a family of
family.
A typeface. A typeface, or some say a typeface, type family, consists of the same design, just in different weights and styles, italic, bold, and so on. So I'd go for maximum 3. You always should have a reason. You always should have a reason for introducing a new visual element. If it's a typeface, a color, an image, whatever, always have a reason for it. And if you don't have, then don't use it. And I don't see you needing more than 2 typefaces.
I have 2 on my side. I just have Gotham for all of my navigation, headers, call to actions, and that's it. And then I have sans serif for the body text. And then that's where, some headers might be bigger, might be bolder. And then some of the body text might be italic or underlined or bolded to make that pop out when needed. But that's kind of my rule of thumb. I've always said that as well. Don't go more than 3, because then it just becomes a jumbled. I don't know what it looks like over there in your area and in Austria and Germany and stuff. But here in the States, like lawyers, attorneys are notorious for putting like 10 different fonts in an ad. And those are the ads that just strike me right to the heart because I'm like, I can't do it. I would never call them because it's so bad. And they read words all the time. So I would think they would be the masters of typography, if anybody. That's kind of my rule of thumb too. I like that you back that up.
Yeah. So a rule of thumb, if it's different, make it different. If it's not different, make it the same, for God's sake. So, and if you have 10 things with different meanings and whatever, then maybe there's a case for that. But in most situations, it is not.
Awesome. Quick question on color. How many colors should you have in your fonts on a website on average? Again, relative, but on average.
Yeah. Oh, that's hard. I love 50 Shades of Grey regarding the colors. So
nice.
Yeah. Designers always love to add another shade of gray, always, or shade of blue or shade of whatever. And there's a reason for that. Basic colors, I would say you have one color for a primary color, then an accent color, and maybe a third color for something that should stand out and for grabbing your attention. And within these color spaces, you can have shades of these colors.
That's perfect.
2 to 3.
Okay. Well, I feel good because that's what I teach in my design course too. So I'm feeling good. I was worried if you were going to have a completely different view from me. Great. So I'm on the right track. That makes me feel good.
Adding something there, if you set things smaller again, you can make them darker. And if you set it larger, you can make the text lighter. And this is... or if you set it in a lighter weight, you can make it darker. And in your case, on your website, again, you could, maybe you increase the font size or you make your text a bit darker. In some situations, it's too thin, too airy.
For the body font?
For the body font, yeah. I just go maybe just bumping up the font size there to make it more to let it stand out a bit more. Or maybe for links, the green is very light for a text color.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Also regarding accessibility issues here from contrast. And if you maybe you could keep the same tone of green, but just make it slightly darker so it will stand out more. And
that's a good point. No, this is good. And we didn't even talk about that yet, but accessibility is huge. I actually just reviewed one of my newer web design student sites. And the text was like, it was a light gray and it was really hard to read. So that was one thing I said is from an accessibility standpoint, you have to make your text legible. That's a biggie. Yeah. So that's a great point. Yeah. I had actually debated. It's funny. It's been a while since I've actually looked at my site through this lens from a design perspective, but I had thought about making my body font just maybe, I think it's at 16 right now. I'll have to double check. Let me double check here, but maybe I'll make it, 17 or 18.
You could go for 18, definitely. And then you also wouldn't have to increase the line height because you also could increase the line height right now. But that's always depending on the situation and stuff and so on. And I know how it is having a website. I just updated the fonts on Pimp My Type as well. And because I wanted to, and I also made a video about that, which is going to be released, I guess, before this podcast, the next one.
Perfect.
But it's always creating more content is, I guess, more valuable than tweaking the typography of your site. It's not horrible.
But you know what? I actually just adjusted it with Inspect Element on my side, and it is at 16, but 17 seems to be even just that 1 pixel difference from font wise, that made a pretty big difference. So I might do that.
One glorious pixel that
made a big difference. Yeah. So my site's going to look different by the time this podcast comes out. That's awesome.
Yeah. Awesome.
I have one last quick rapid fire question. Then we'll end this here, Oliver, because it's been great, but I think we could go for 3 hours on this stuff, man.
We could.
What are your thoughts on white or lighter text on dark background versus dark text on light background? You've heard my thoughts. I tend to use light text on dark backgrounds for accent areas, menus, and things like that. And I prefer personally to just read dark text on white backgrounds. What are your thoughts on how and when to use that color contrast?
Yeah, this is also an accessibility issue because there are some people that are very sensitive to light and dark mode. I made a website for the Association for the Blind in one federal state of Austria. And there they have, dark mode by default, basically, because the thing is, the problem with accessibility and light text and dark background and all the things is that there's not you can see and you can't see. There's so much in between. There's so much in between. I don't want to touch on accessibility here too much because this is a really strong topic on its own. Could do an own episode about it, but
we might have to.
We might have to, especially when it comes to typography. But when you set dark text on light background, you always should decrease the color or make the contrast not that harsh, not 100% black on 100% white. This is very harsh. Also, accessibility in some cases, this might be just right for some people. But but maybe let's say 90% black on white. And on the other side, if you have a dark background or a very dark gray in hexadecimal terms, 2222 or something like this. Yeah, I like 222 for backgrounds. And this is something where your text can be then 100% white, but you should, when you set light text on dark background, the text kind of seems to glow. So you can use the lighter weight there to make it visually even to the dark color. And there are some typefaces that provide you, also variable fonts, that provide you with a version that is optimized for light dark text on light text on dark background, which is awesome because then you have a great experience there. There's action text is one, or dark mode is one. I have a Font Friday recommendation newsletter each week where people can sign up to get a font recommendation, and I featured these two typefaces last year where you can check this out.
Awesome. Well, perfect segue because I was going to mention your website. So definitely everybody who wants to visualize a lot of this and check this out, go to Oliver's site, pimpmytype.com. What was interesting is I was just looking at your website. Your website is 99.9% text. So the design aspects, it's really funny. It's all typography. Like aside from a couple pictures of you and even the graphics in your website feature text on top of that. It's really interesting because you are a shining example of how to make text interesting. We didn't even cover emojis. I wanted to ask, that's my final rapid fire question. What do you think about emojis? Because I love accenting things with emojis now.
I love accenting things with emojis. No, I love it as well. I just love it. And in some situations, it works really good. You can use it in unordered lists or on Twitter. You can use it as a bullet point or something. You can structure things with emojis. And emojis are like emphasis. You cannot set text bold in a text message or something, but you can add an emoji to it. And you will immediately react to this emoji, of course. If you have the possibility to set something strong or emphasize it with an italic or something else or a link or whatever in a paragraph, then your eye is drawn to that automatically. Yeah. In reading text, also I would use it. I wouldn't use it that
sparingly.
Much. Sparingly, yeah. But I would definitely. I recommend doing it because. Yeah, it just draws people in. If it's too much, it's too much, of course, but it draws people in. And when you use it, always think about that the emojis don't mess up your line height. Oh, because when you edit, most of the time
it's in the font. Right.
It's in the font. It's an inline element. Yeah, it changes something. So if your line height is too little, you have to address that.
That's awesome. Awesome, Oliver. This has been great, man. I was going to ask where you wanted everyone to go, but I think you just said it. Go to your website, pimpmytype.com, and then you have your Font Friday newsletter, which is awesome. Really excited to see what you continue to do. Man, this was a really fun talk. Again, we got kind of nerdy in with the typography, but this was fun. I don't do this often on the pod. It's kind of nice to switch up from business talk and just to talk about, something design related. So I really enjoyed this, man. Thanks for coming on and sharing your expertise. Last question for you. What is your favorite font and why?
Oh my God, why do you force me to pick my favorite child? I have 3 of them now.
Oh, okay. You have 3 favorites. All right. You can say all 3.
No, right. This is like the question, what's your favorite tool? Is it a hammer? Yes, it's a hammer. I always use it to drive my screws. It's the best.
Okay. Okay. That's fair.
No, depending on the application, on the occasion. Right now, I just used for my personal site Magnet, which is a typeface by Frere Jones type. Tobias Frere Jones also designed Gotham. So you like that one, I guess.
Hey, all right. I appreciate that.
It's not by him. Yeah. It's from his foundry. It's by Nina Stössing, I guess. And it's a great typeface for headings. It's a bit quirky. I think it fits the mood and the style I want to convey for my audience. So I used that Magnet for my headings and display text and also functional text because it's readable at small sizes as well. And for the body text, it's a serif typeface Piazzolla, which is also a bit edgy, a bit pointy, a bit quirky. So these are my 2 favorites right now, but I'm certainly having another favorite next Font Friday when I pick this on my
Okay. Hey, that's great, man. Yeah, no, I definitely feel like your fonts fit you and your personality type, which goes back to the very first point. You got to find the fonts that fit the feeling. So great way to end off this podcast. Oliver, thanks for coming on and sharing a lot of your thoughts, expertise, and skill set with us on this. I really enjoyed it, man. Maybe we'll have to have you back on to talk accessibility soon.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Bye, Josh.
Thanks, man. Cheers. Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.